Hello, this is James Naughtie, and here is a programme from the Book Club archive, first broadcast in 2004. Hello and welcome to Discworld, which is where Book Club finds itself today, a disc that turns on the backs of 4 giant elephants, who in turn perch on the shell of a giant turtle. This universe, which sometimes feels as if it's been designed by Hieronymus Bosch, is the setting for 31 of Terry Pratchett's novels, and one of them, Mort, is our book this month. You might have heard Radio 4's dramatisation of Mort on Tuesday nights in the course of the last few weeks. Discworld is a place which, if you know it, you understand and accept, and if you don't, you may find so bizarre that you enter its portals with great trepidation. But you'll find it a funny place with funny people. They make you laugh, even when they're dealing with death, whose apprentice Mort is. He's a pretty ungainly boy when a skeleton draped in a black cloth comes to take him off to the great dirty city of Ankh-Morpork to work for him, on his horse, who has the rather unlikely name of Binky. Mort watches death at work. He doesn't kill people, he only brings them towards death. But after thousands of years, he's beginning to get fed up with the work, and he ends up as a cook in a greasy spoon. And Mort takes over the grim reaping. Terry Pratchett, welcome to Book Club. Let me ask you first of all, for those who are not inculcated into the secrets of Discworld and its mysteries and its excitements and its fun, how the whole thing started.
Discworld began as an antidote to fantasy. In fact, it was interesting to find out at the first ever Discworld convention, which was about, 8 or 10 years ago now, 90% of the people who attended did not think of themselves as fantasy readers, although they read Discworld. In the early 1980s, there was a lot of fantasy which, in many respects, was a copy of Tolkien. And I thought, there were so many cliches here, so much fun could be had. Discworld was, I suppose, the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy for fantasy. I take my life in my hands by saying that, but that's probably as good a way as I could put it. Discworld is written by a better writer now. I've been doing it for 21 years, and Mort is actually the first Discworld book that I'm quite pleased about. But if I wrote it now, I'd write it better.
So in what sense, I want to bring in our readers in a moment, in what sense is it a transition in the sequence? I mean, do you see it as one that is maybe not a turning point, but a development in the sequence?
The first couple of books were fun, jokes at the expense of the fantasy universe. The plot was really there just to stop the front and back of the book banging together in the middle. And then I realised by Mort, for the book to work, it's got to work as a book independently of the humour. So I think I've got better at that now, but Mort was when I started to get better, I think.
I think you wanted to say something, didn't you?
I am a fantasy reader. You mentioned there's only about 10 or 20% of us or so that are your fans. There was an awful lot of bad fantasy around in the mid to early 80s. Mm-hmm. Was there one thing that just set you off and said, right, I've had enough, I'm going to write an antidote to all of this, well, rubbish?
Yeah, there was. There was a book I was leafing through. A character said something like, "If faith, he will wax wrath." I thought, he'll wax the table. I mean, it doesn't... And it always had the same kind of map. So you do the Pointy Mountains and the Wiggly River, and that's the Northland and that's the Southland. This world is like Middle-earth after the Industrial Revolution. You know, when you realise that the orcs may as well be employed, and you find that they've all got wives and little orcs, and that some trolls actually like poetry, and everyone's come to the big city and they're trying to make an honest dollar. This one is incredibly flexible. It has a condom factory. It worked, it was part of a plot, and why not? Latex is a natural product. You can't do that in Middle-earth. You can't think about doing it in Narnia. I mean, just didn't go there. And yet it wasn't done particularly for laughs. It was because I needed a large vat of rubber at one point. And it fitted in because of the kind of eclectic nature of Discworld. Discworld is a fantasy version of this world, and I suspect that's what makes it attractive.
My question's about the character of Death. You wouldn't expect to be fond of any character representing death, but you can't help it. Did you plan that from the start, or did you grow to love him too?
I treated him as a human character. I mean, Death is the classic Death out of, if you like, medieval folklore.
I mean, he is a skeleton with a cloak and all the accoutrements that you
But
expect
he's
with a
human-shaped.
Mephistophelian figure.
But he's human-shaped.
Yes.
And it's a theme that extends through Discworld, that shape, to an extent, defines function. He has hands, admittedly skeletal hands. He is the same shape as us, and he constantly is puzzled by humanity. We only have, 70 and maybe 100 years if we're lucky, and we spend all our brief life making it as complicated for us as we can. We are a source of endless fascination to him. This introspection is just beginning in Mort, and he is quite a sympathetic character because he doesn't understand humanity. He keeps trying to, but he only sees it from the outside.
This is quite serious stuff, isn't it? People do seem to like him. I mean, why do you like him?
I've read almost all of the Discworld books, and I think Death is one of them. Really charming, recurring characters.
Charming?
He's my favourite. I love it. One of the questions I came here really wanting to ask was whether, when you started to write Mort, you knew that you were going to write more than one Discworld book about Death. He appeared before this, I'm pretty sure, but he has taken a kind of starring role in some of the books that have come after, and I was wondering if you knew that was going to happen.
When I wrote Mort, which was the fourth book in the Discworld series, I didn't know that there was going to be a fifth book. So I certainly had no idea of there being a plan or a story arc. Now I'm on, I don't know, I think I'm writing the 33rd Discworld book now, so I've got a vague idea that there may be a 34th, just our kind of feeling. He has come alive, and it's a very strange thing for Death to do. And I've had just so much mail about him, and this may not exactly be the most tasteful thing to say, but I've had letters like, Great Aunt Maisie really loved the character of Death in your books, and she's 97 when she discovered Discworld, and she's read them all, and we were taking them up to the hospice every day until she died. And I think, those kind of letters make you sit and stare at the wall for the rest of but not in a bad way. He means a lot to a lot of people, and sometimes people who are due to check fairly quickly whether I've got the right idea about Death.
Well, I was just going to ask, really, it strikes me that there's something about the writer in Death, not you personally necessarily, but that way that he stands aside and watches and puzzles over behaviour seems to be something that you see in a quality of writers do this thing where they observe, they watch, and I wonder if that's where your connection with him is, or do you have that connection with him as a writer? You watch humanity.
What's an interesting question?
And
yes,
he watches humanity.
For what is thought of as an inconsequential comic novel, this is getting positively abyssal in its depth.
Oh well, it's these are the sort of people who specialise in the book club.
The point is, Death is always on the outside, and to an extent, I suppose. Hey, this is South Bank stuff. To an extent, so is the author. This should be a couch. Now I come to think about it, a lot of my characters are outside, watching the carnival that they can't actually take part in. They've got that bit of them that doesn't join in. And that's where the writer lives, watching everything, listening to everything, looking at everything. And I suppose Death is that character. Although, as the books progress, he begins to show his colours a little bit. There is a scene in Masquerade, where he plays a game of poker with Granny Weatherwax, a character that was barely existing in the series at this time. And it becomes clear that if you're really, really, really prepared to bet everything in a game against Death, he might just weigh the balance in your favour. He has some sympathy for us in our plight. We're going to be dead in a few years' time. And you get the impression, as I do, that he's kind of on our side. He doesn't, it's nothing personal. He has a job to do.
Give us a reading from the book, Terry, and set the scene.
It takes place not long after Mort, who is entirely a human boy, has been taken on as Death's apprentice. Mort listened to the clatter of stone under the horse's hooves. Then there was the soft thud of packed earth as they reached the road, and then there was nothing at all. He looked down and saw the landscape spread out below him. the night etched with moonlight silver. If he fell off, the only thing he'd hit was air. He redoubled his grip on the saddle. Then Death said, "Are you hungry, boy?" "Yes, sir." Death nodded and reined in the horse. It stood on the air, the great circular panorama of the disc glittering below it. Here and there a city was an orange glow. In some of the deep valleys the trapped daylight of the disc, which is slow and slightly heavy, was evaporating like silver steam. But it was outshone by the glow that rose towards the stars from the rim itself. Vast streamers of light shimmered and glittered across the night. Great golden walls surrounded the world. "It's beautiful," said Mort softly. "What is it?" "The sun is under the disc," said Death. "Is it like this every night?" "Every night," said Death. "Doesn't anyone know?" said Mort. "Me," said Death. "You? The gods? Good, is it?" "Gosh," said Mort. Death leaned over the saddle and looked down at the kingdoms of the world. "I don't know about you," he said, "but I could murder a curry."
You're listening to Book Club on BBC Radio 4 with Terry Pratchett discussing his novel Mort.
Yeah, what you were saying is the idea that death seems to be very popular. I was just wondering, if you read some of the heavier broadsheets from time to time, you find articles saying that as a culture we've lost touch with death. Do you think this is a way of people refamiliarising themselves? Actually accepting we're not going to beat it, so we better get used to the idea and have him as a sort of distant uncle.
I'm arguing against myself, I suppose, but this is the kind of the acceptable face of Death. He's a nice character. As is pointed out in the books, I mean, Death is the Grim Reaper, but he can't help, as it were, liking people. And that makes him funny. But the thing is that the use of Death, it harks back to the medieval mummers plays. You know, God would turn up on stage. You know, Father Time, Death, you could have anyone. It's only in the last couple of 100 years that he hasn't turned up as a character at some point. The thing about meeting death after you're dead is it's kind of mixed feelings, really. Yes, you're dead, but there's clearly some kind of you who's there actually seeing death, which suggests an afterlife of some sort.
Do you believe that?
Ask me again in 150 years.
I want to ask, we happen to have the organiser of the fan club here, and I just want to ask you to what you attribute the grip of Discworld in general, but characters like Death, when we've been discussing.
Well, I think the first scene in Mort, when he's walking across the icy courtyard and he suddenly slips on a patch of ice and says, "Oh, bugger that." I mean, I just adored him from then on, you know. I mean, how can you not like a skeleton that does that?
Is that the sort of explanation that other people would give? I mean, what, as gentleman in the back here?
It's made death a more accessible idea. Up until then, you've sort of got the idea that, oh, what is death all about? You haven't got a clue. And now all of a sudden, it's actually put into a concept that you can understand fairly easily. It's made more human, rather than some grand scheme that is beyond us.
Yeah, and you don't need to get into metaphysics. I mean, he's there. He's just sort of wandering around with his cloak.
Yeah.
Hang on a sec, yeah.
I'd like to ask Terry how much research he does for the books. For example, the word Mort is actually the Hindu word for death, and also the whole structure of the Discworld is actually based on Hindu mythology, and I was just wondering how much research he does.
The Mort, mortician, mortis, I mean, that's easily done. I don't actually do research. I mean, occasionally, I think I need to know something about chocolate or how clocks are made or something, and I'll go and look it up. I'm a great believer in serendipitous research. You read anything that seems to be interesting. You just find things that you just didn't expect in some book that you didn't expect to find them in. I may as well say this publicly for the first time. The whole thing with the flat world and the turtle and the elephants, I think that was kind of like a wrong decision on my part, because nearly everything that happens on Discworld happens on the surface of Discworld, on a world which looks just like this one. And, you know, it's a funny thing, when we walk around on this world, we don't say to each other on a daily basis, "Do you know, we happen to be on this ball of rock and molten iron, which is circular and very, very painful if you're in the middle, and it's spinning around. We don't say that, and on Discworld, people do not refer to the fact that there's a turtle down there. It's just what it's all about. And people always start with, well, there's this world that's flat and goes through space on the back of a giant turtle, which isn't actually what Discworld is about at all. But it was something I dreamt up at the beginning because it's straight out. I mean, you're right. It comes to its finest flowering in Hindu mythology, but aspects of it are in other mythologies as well. Because I wanted with all due respect to the Hindu religion, something which looked ridiculous, something that was clearly alien, something that wasn't a planet. But now, I think there are people that just don't get past that statement.
One here, and then in the front.
All through lots of the books, there's always plays on words. There's a lot in soul music. Do the puns come to you just out of nowhere, or do you actively go looking for them, say like Jilly Cooper does?
I think puns and plays on words are two slightly different things. Sometimes a play on words can add quite a bit of power to the book. The one I really like is, you'll all know, but I can't remember. Commander Vimes of the City Watch, who came up from the streets, commander of the watch, he has this wonderful gold breastplate that he has to wear on ceremonial occasions. And he's kind of embarrassed about the fact that he's now a duke, and all his hatred of being in that kind of position is funneled into his hatred of this armour, which of course is guilt, or as it's put in the book, guilt by association. And then there are the puns that don't get done, as in The Wee Free Men. There is a toad in that book which can talk, which is very, very pale. In fact, it's practically yellow, and the reason it's practically yellow is because it's been ill, and these facts are explained in this kind of fairy tale setting, but at no point is my heroine told to follow the yellow sick toad. So that was a pun which was very deliberately not put there.
Some people may feel it's just as well, but some things are better left to stick to the wall. The gentleman in the middle, I think.
With the spread of the internet, there's fan clubs and fan fiction and people stealing Discworld and writing their own stories using your characters. Do you ever find you're drawn to read those and use those, or do you have to try and avoid them?
I very deliberately don't look at any fan fiction, and anything that gets sent to me is carefully filleted upstream of me before it gets to my desk, and sometimes I get letters which have been carefully folded and stapled. Here's this really cool idea about... because we did have someone once who said, you must have read my idea. Fortunately, this gentleman had no idea how far in advance a manuscript actually goes to the publishers, and at the time he'd done that little bit of fan fiction, the bound proof copies were already out. But that kind of worried me, so no, I don't look at any Discworld fanfic. I'm perfectly happy that it exists. I don't have any copyright hang-ups about it. And in a sense, I'm glad that people do it, but I hope they then move on to do their own stuff.
Backing away to the puns, you also like to get references, we all know, in your Discworld books, and reading them is often a game of spot the reference, like Fabricate Diem Punk, sort of Clint Eastwood job. But how much do you actually go out your way to try and get references in?
The references are... they're references to popular culture and ancient history, lots of times to ancient history.
Well, you get it both ways. Fabricate Diem Punk, make my day.
Well, yeah, in something that isn't quite Latin, let's be clear about it.
Well, indeed. No. Yes.
Fabricatus is a lovely Latin word, if only it existed.
Well, exactly.
I was wondering how many of the Latin things are real. Are you a real Latin lover?
No, but I know people who are, or at least can come up with authoritatively bad things, and I normally have some rough idea what it is I'm after. I was actually trying a Greek one the other day, but it just wouldn't work. We couldn't find the right typeface.
You've talked a bit about your serendipity approach to research, and now you're talking a little bit about your own knowledge and background. Just give us a pen portrait of your own education.
Well, in Who's Who, it says my education was at Beaconsfield Public Library, and in truth that is true. I went to school, I passed the 11 plus, which was an examination we used to have in those days.
Indeed.
But school kind of flowed over the top and around me. I often think that if someone had just taken half an hour to kind of explain things to me, I'd have settled in a bit more. I wasn't a particularly bad scholar, I wasn't a particularly good one.
When did you learn the delight of writing, of creative writing?
My first short story, which actually ended up as being the first story that I had commercially published, was done as a school essay. The teacher gave me 20 out of 20 for it and put it in the school magazine, and the kids loved it. And I thought, this is it, you know, I'm actually a popular kid, which was not a particularly familiar sensation. You know, I wasn't like the last kid to get selected in PT for the teams, but I'd be in the last 4. And it was, I think, Art Bookclub who said that in every gang of kids there's the writer, the one who relies on telling jokes and stories in order to be accepted.
Did you feel that when you left school, that you were a writer?
Well, when I left school, it was to go straight into a job as journalism, so whether you consider that to be writing, that's certainly what I was doing. And that was incredibly good training for me, because, first of all, you learn there's no such thing as writer's block. If you get it, the editor comes and shouts at you.
Yes, you've got something to say.
Yes, one of my favourite parts of the book is when Death goes to look for a job and goes to the job broker. This helps youngsters get into the book. There's a classic line which always helps my daughter overcome problems she has at school. It would seem you have no useful skills or talent whatsoever. Have you thought about going into teaching?
Yes.
Now, is that from the heart?
It's certainly from the brain. It was possibly an unwarranted sideswipe in the case of some teachers. And once I found out that the quickest way to learn something is to have to teach it to someone else, I thought I began to understand it. But I'm a humorist. There's part of me that will go for the gag. You know, I could have been a contender. I could have been a Booker winner, probably, if it wasn't for that. I have this terrible idea that occasionally it should be funny. But I have to say, I can't possibly disown Mort. It was a great book to write. I can see the flaws in it now. I think a book like Night Watch, which is a comparatively recent book, is a much better book. It may be darker, the characters have more depth. There's a lot of humour in it, but a lot of the humour is, as it were, on the edge of the grave. Maybe occasionally I'm now just overcoming the urge to be funny all the time.
You answered a question about unsolicited fan fiction.
Mm-hmm.
There are an awful lot of people who officially contribute to Discworld, other than you. I mean, the cover illustrations by Josh Kirby, there's the video games, the role-play game, the maps, you collaborate on the play adaptations, I believe.
I collaborate on the maps as well. Yeah.
And I was just wondering how you feel about letting other people play with your toys, and about Discworld moving into different media.
You have to remember that this is all fairly kind of small-scale stuff. And so I know the people involved, I get to talk to them. Almost invariably, I have the veto as well. It never actually leaves my sandpit. Even when they did the 2 animations, we had long discussions about Granny Weatherwax's boots and what colour clothing Nanny Og should wear and things like that. And what was nice is that I was dealing with people who were experts at what they did, and I could recognise that. And so we could meet halfway. That's why I'm so nervous about movies. Movies, you know, the writer has no real control whatsoever. They do give you a lot of money, but they take everything away. And most importantly, from my point of view, they want merchandising. You lose control of your characters, and I think that would really be a bit of a blow to me.
Lady here. Yeah.
Some of your later novels, I'm thinking of Weird Sisters and Lords and Ladies, have parallels with Shakespeare, Macbeth, Midsummer Night's Dream. Mort sort of started almost as Great Expectations, but it fizzled out a bit. Was that deliberate, just a scene set, or did you make the decision not to carry on with that train of thought, as it were?
To be frank, I just didn't see the link. You know, I just thought I was writing about Mort. And in a sense, I think what's happening is you're putting 2 things together under the light, and you can see kind of the edges match. But Mort ends exactly as Mort should do, given the way Mort started. So I think I had that story arc pretty well worked out in my head.
It is a happy ending, isn't it? I mean, he's making a happy marriage, it seems.
Yeah.
He's saying to Death, well, on your days off, I'll take over from you, don't worry.
Yeah, but of course, there's always that slight poignancy. It is Death we are dealing with here. You know, he knows he's going to see him again.
In the BBC Big Read Top 100, you had more books in the Top 100 than any other author.
Oh, Dickens?
Well,
Tied with Dickens.
The one that's alive. You're alive. He is.
I'm alive, yeah.
Okay. Do you feel because you've had so many books that you've actually sort of diluted your talent so that you weren't in the top 10?
Well, on the other hand, I wrote a lot of books, so I got a big following, and then my fans, being much harder to organise than Hobbit folk, all voted for the one they liked. God damn it! And I think, including the 200, it was like I had about 10 or 15 or whatever because people voted for the book they liked. I'm glad that a lot of people like Mort. I didn't expect to get one book in the BBC Top 100. I was just amazed that I was there at all. And incredibly pleased. And for a while, I used to wear a T-shirt with the slogan "Less dead than Dickens."
Book 32 about to be published. Book 33 in the making. How long will Discworld go on?
I don't intend ever to write the last Discworld book. I do intend, and of course there will be people here that will utter a hollow laugh. I do intend to slow down because for many years I've been writing 2 books a year, and now dealing with the mail and the signing tours, and a terrible thing happened. The book suddenly became very popular in America, so they want me to tour there a lot, and I get far more mail now. And just 1 book a year. Other people manage on 1 book a year. I really think I ought to slow down.
Terry Pratchett, slowing down. Thank you very much for being our guest on Book Club this month.